June 28th, 1944. 3:41 a.m. near Babruysk, Byelorussian SSR. The sky is on fire. Not metaphorically, literally. The eastern horizon flickers orange and white as Soviet artillery walks its way across the tree line, each impact punching another hole in the darkness. Every blast throws up a column of dirt and shattered pine that glows for a heartbeat before collapsing back into shadow. The air is a mixture of cordite, wet soil, and something metallic you can almost taste on your tongue. In the middle of it all, half hidden in a shallow roadside ditch, sits a Panzer IV H that shouldn't be there anymore. Number 431, turret marking scorched, Scherzen side skirts bent and missing in places. Its long 7.5 centimeters KWK 40L/48 gun barrel pointing uselessly toward a sky already full of other people's war. The engine is dead. The crew is gone. Only one man is still inside. Unteroffizier Otto Feldman wipes a smear of oil from his cheek with the back of his hand, forgetting that his sleeve is filthier than his face. He lies half on his back in the bowels of the fighting compartment, head and shoulders buried under the turret basket, boots braced against ammo racks. Somewhere above him, dust sifts down from the last near miss, sprinkling into his hair like gray snow. He ignores it. His world has shrunk to cramped steel, dead wiring, and the stubborn silence of a Maybach HL-120 that refuses to answer when called. "Come on, Alter Junge," he mutters under his breath, voice echoing in the armor. "One more time, just one more." His fingers trace cables by touch. Here, the main ignition line, charred where a fragment punched through the hull hours ago. There, the melted remains of a junction box that should be sending life to the starter. Should be, isn't. He hears boots scuffing outside, then the clank of someone slipping on the hull. "Otto!" A voice hisses down through the open commander's hatch. "Verdum, you still inside?" Feldman wriggles backward until his head clears the turret ring. He blinks up into the dawn, where the silhouette of Lieutenant Carl Weber leans over the hatch combing. Tanker's headset askew. Black Panzer jacket white with dust. Otto squints. "Where else would I be?" "Out here." Weber snaps, gesturing wildly at the flaming horizon. "Regiments pulling back. We're falling behind the infantry. The whole front is collapsing." A fresh barrage lands somewhere to their left, the sound rolling over them like a physical wave. The tank rocks slightly, loose tools clinking against the hull. Weber ducks instinctively, then looks back down. "Feldman, the Maybach is finished," he says, forcing the words out. "Transmission's gone. Wiring's burned. We can't tow her. If we stay, we get overrun. I won't lose you to some Ivan with a Molotov, because you won't admit a wreck is a wreck." Otto pushes himself upright, shoulders brushing the inside of the turret. He plants a hand on the breech of the gun to steady himself. He's not tall, not broad, just compact, all tendon and stubbornness, with grease ground into the lines of his hands so deeply it might as well be a tattoo. "It's not a wreck," he says simply. "Not yet." Weber's laugh is half a cough. "You mean the same way I'm not retreating? Look around, Otto. Bagration. They're coming through like water. 45s, T-34s, Guards infantry, the whole Red Army." He jerks his thumb toward the road. "We still have 3 runners," he says. "Panther, 1 other 4, and the Stoogie. If we move now, we can stay with the others. If we don't, he lets the sentence die." Otto knows what that means. Captured, burned, buried under someone else's offensive. He looks around the interior of 431. The chipped paint. The scuffs where boots have worn steel smooth. The gouges in the turret where shell splinters glanced off, leaving scars they joked about later. He sees the places where the rest of the crew sat, the loader's corner, the gunner's seat. Empty now. They'd gone back with Weber when the engine first died in the night, under order. Otto had stayed. "Give me until dawn," he says quietly. "If I can't make her move by then, I'll run." Weber checks his watch, the loom barely visible in the dim. "That's 20 minutes," he says. "You can't rebuild a transmission in 20 minutes, Otto." "I'm not rebuilding anything," Feldman says. "I'm cheating." A shell winds overhead like an angry god and lands somewhere behind them, showering the road with bits of tree and dirt. Weber flinches, then swears under his breath. "You are insane," he mutters. "You know that." Otto's mouth quirks. "You've said." Weber hesitates. "There's regulation, and then there's reality. Right now, reality is a front line moving west at the speed of a T-34, and a mechanic who refuses to do what tanks are supposed to do when the engine dies. which is stay dead. Weber exhales, anger bleeding into resignation. 20 minutes, he says. Not a heartbeat more. When it's light enough for them to see that road, they'll be on it. I'm regrouping with the others in that copse. He points toward a distant patch of trees. And if you're not out of this steel coffin by then. His voice cracked for just a second. I won't be able to come back. I know, Otto says. Weber stares down at him, eyes searching the smaller man's face for something. For fear, maybe, or doubt. He finds neither. Verdammt, he says again, but softer. All right, 20 minutes, Feldman. Make a miracle. He disappears from the hatch. Otto hears him slide down the side of the hull. Hears orders barked. Hears engines revving somewhere down the road as the remaining vehicles of Panzer Regiment 31 prepare to move. Then the world narrows again. Just him. Just the tank. Just the distant thunder of approaching guns. Otto drops back into the bowels of the Panzer. Street light from the hatch, painting a pale rectangle on the turret floor above his head. He moves quickly now, not with the hopeless flailing of a man refusing reality, but with the focused calm of someone who has already accepted it and decided to ignore it anyway. The main ignition loom is cooked. Fine. Transmission linking the Maybach to the drive sprockets is twisted metal. Fine. Who said the tank has to move? He crawls forward in the driver's compartment, boots scraping on steel, and yanks open the radio panel. The Fug 5 set inside is dead, battery drained, aerial shattered, but the guts, the coils and switches and wires, those are very much alive. You always said, I loved radios more than engines, he mutters to no one, fingertips already tracing the circuits. Let's see if you were right, Herr Oberfeldwebel. Outside, another Soviet shell lands closer, the concussion slamming against the Panzer's armor like a giant hand. Inside, Otto doesn't even look up. He's thinking about ignition pulses, about feeding the starter directly, bypassing the burn harness, about making the Maybach bark one more time with the electrical equivalent of a jump start from hell. And if he can't, he glances back at the turret ring. Then he'll make them think it's alive anyway. Because tanks are more than engines. They're silhouettes. Guns. The way a turret moves on a ridge line. Sometimes all an enemy needs to see to stop dead is the idea of a Panzer in the right place. It doesn't have to drive. It just has to haunt the field. Otto grins. A quick, humorless flash. Jespenster Panzer, he murmurs. A ghost tank. He pulls the first handful of wires from the dead radio set and reaches for his pliers as the sky outside the hatch slowly shifts from black to iron gray. Dawn is coming. So is the Red Army. And somewhere between those two, in the cramped steel belly of 431, a mechanic with oil under his nails is about to rewrite what a dead tank can do. The light inside the tank is changing. What was pure black a few minutes ago is now a kind of deep steel blue leaking in through the open commander's hatch, just enough to outline the bolts and brackets around Otto's head in faint silhouette. Outside, the artillery hasn't stopped. It's just moved. The Wumps are marching west, toward positions that an hour ago were friendly rear. Somewhere back there, German field kitchens and truck parks are disappearing under geysers of dirt and fire. But inside 431, the war is quieter. Just the creak of steel as Otto shifts his weight. The soft click of pliers. The faint ticking of cooling metal. He's halfway pried the Fug 5 radio set out of its rack, cables stretching like tendons as he pulls. Come on, Liebes Ding, he mutters. You're not talking to anybody anymore. Time to donate some organs. The set comes loose with a protesting squeal. It drops into his lap, and he nearly loses his balance, boots skidding against the driver's seat. He catches himself, curses, then starts stripping it. Not methodically like in a workshop. No careful unscrewing from the corners. He rips the back panel off, exposing guts, coils, resistors, relay switches, a tangle of fine copper wire. It looks like a miniature city under glass. He doesn't care about the city. He cares about the arteries. He snips one coil free, then another, using his pliers more like a surgeon's scalpel than a mechanic's tool. He builds the shape in his head as he goes, battery, coil, improvised distributor, jump leads to what's left of the starter system. He crawls forward into the driver's hole, the steering levers poking his ribs, and exposes the main electrical box. The smell of burned insulation wafts up when he opens it. Skies, he whispers. Most of the harness is a melted, fused mass. But not all of it. He finds one surviving lead from the battery, another from the starter relay that isn't entirely cooked. Enough to work with, maybe. You can almost feel the cramped air, the way it presses on his chest as he twists himself sideways, sweat starting to break out along his hairline despite the pre-dawn chill. Otto wedges the cannibalized radio coil into the space beside the ruined ignition block, wires looping like vines. He strips insulation with his teeth when the knife is out of reach. Sparks snap once as he bridges a connection, the taste of metal sharp on his tongue. Outside, an engine revs and fades as a panther claws its way back down the road toward the rally point. Somewhere close, someone yells, "Los, los, los." For a moment, Otto feels like the entire world is leaving him behind. He clamps down on the feeling like he clamps down on the wire. You wanted 20 minutes, he tells himself. You've burned 10. He tightens the last crude connection with shaking fingers. The jury-rigged coil sits there, absurd and delicate inside a machine designed to shrug off 45mm shells. All right, he says to it. Do your trick. He backs out of the driver's compartment, ribs scraping metal, and hauls himself half into the fighting compartment. From there, he can reach the starter button. He glances up through the hatch. The sky is lighter now, a smear of gray over the eastern trees. He presses his palm flat against the turret wall, feeling the tank around him like a living thing. Last chance, Alter Junge, he whispers. Wake up, or we both stay here forever. His thumb finds the starter. He presses. Nothing, just the distant echo of artillery and his own heartbeat in his ears. He holds the button down, jaw clenched, willing electrons to do what physics and common sense say they shouldn't. For a long moment, too long, there's only silence. Then a faint click, then another, then the sluggish, uneven grind of the starter, trying to turn an engine that has no right to move. It's like listening to someone who's been shot try to take a deep breath. Come on, Otto hisses. The starter catches. The Maybach coughs once, loud in the enclosed space, then dies. Otto swears, hits the button again. This time the sound is stronger. The grind has teeth. The improvised coil is throwing something into the system, brute-forcing sparks into cylinders that didn't ask for them. Outside, a Soviet rocket salvo whooshes into the air. The sound is distant, but unmistakable, katyushas. They're walking their fire somewhere up the line, trying to smash whatever's left of German resistance before daylight. Otto doesn't have time to picture where those rockets are landing. He hits the starter a third time. The Maybach spits, coughs, and catches. The engine shudders into a rough, uneven idle, the whole tank vibrating around him. The deck plates buzz under his boots. Dust sifts from every seam. Otto laughs once, a sound halfway between triumph and shock. You stubborn bastard, he says, patting the bulkhead. I knew you had something left. He listens closely. The idle is unsteady. The revs wander. This is not an engine you trust to haul you out of mud or across a field. But it's noise. It's smoke. It's life. And it's enough to spin a turret motor. Or scare a man who only sees a silhouette on the skyline. He glances at the transmission linkage. One look confirms what he already knows. A crack in housing. Oil pooled where it shouldn't be. A shattered tooth in a gear that might hold under idle, but not under load. No driving for you, he mutters. You're a bunker now. He kills the engine, just for a moment, to listen for the world outside. The artillery has moved further west. Not entirely, but enough to suggest that the Soviets are preparing to push again, not just pound. Infantry will come first. Recon, then armor. Otto's gaze drifts upward to the turret. He has one more trick to pull. The Panzer IV's turret traverse is supposed to be powered, an electric hydraulic system that lets the gunner swing the 7.5 centimeters quickly on a target. Supposed to doesn't mean will. The hit that killed the wiring also took out part of the traverse control. Otto had checked that earlier in the night. No joy. But the turret can also be moved manually. Cranks, gearboxes, raw muscle turning many tons of steel a degree at a time. Normally, that's the gunner's job. Normally, there's a gunner. Otto looks around the empty fighting compartment. Congratulations, he tells himself. You're now driver, gunner, loader, commander, a traverse monkey. He rummages in the tool rack until he finds what he's looking for. A length of steel rod with a flattened end, a jack handle. He tries it in the manual traverse socket. It doesn't fit. He grits his teeth, pulls it out, and starts filing the end against a bracket. Metal screeches on metal. Shavings fall like glitter in the dim light. He tries again. It seats this time, not perfectly, but enough. He leans on it experimentally. The turret resists at first, then groans as the gears engage. It moves a slow, begrudging centimeter at a time. In the hatch, the outside world slews just a fraction as the long barrel tracks across the tree line. Good, Otto pants. You can still look scary. He tests the range of motion. Left, right. The resistance is uneven, but usable. He pictures the field in front of them. The road, the ditch, the small rise that 431 is currently hull down behind. From a Soviet side, in a half-light of dawn, all they'll see is a Panzer's turret peeking over the lip. Turret that moves. Gun that points. Engine that growls. They don't need to know the tracks are dead. They just need to believe it can bite. He glances at the ammo racks. He doesn't have much. A few armor-piercing rounds. The usual Cokes MG-34 boxes. He could try to fight. Take a shot at a T-34 or an infantry column. Die like every propaganda poster says a German tanker should. But that's not the plan forming in his head. He doesn't need to destroy them. He just needs to make them hesitate. To make some Soviet officer with field glasses and a field phone decide, for a critical half hour, that this stretch of road is too hot to push down. Long enough for Weber and the others to slip away. Long enough to turn a rout into a retreat. A ghost tank, Otto murmurs again. Not a killer. A story. He hears something then, faint over the distant guns. Engines. Not German. Lower pitch. Different rhythm. Coming from the east. Soviets. He wipes his hands on his overalls, smearing oil deeper into the fabric, and scrambles up toward the hatch to get his first look. Dawn is here. So is the Red Army. And Otto Feldman is sitting alone in a crippled Panzer with a half-alive engine, a hand-cranked turret, and an idea that might get him killed, or turn his wreck into the most dangerous illusion on this road. From the hatch, the world looks washed out and unreal. Dawn has turned the sky into a sheet of dull pewter. A thin mist clings to the dips in the ground, pooling in the low spots like water that forgot how to shine. Somewhere beyond the tree line, crows wheel and scream, offended by the noise of men. Otto presses his helmeted head just above the rim of the commander's cupola, eyes barely clearing the lip. The grass on the slope in front of 431 is beaded with dew. Beyond it, the road runs like a hard, gray scar through the landscape, disappearing into the eastern haze. He hears them before he sees them. Soviet engines. Plural. Not the deep, smooth grumble of German Maybachs. These are rougher, harsher, with a distinct metallic whine. V2 diesel and T-34s, maybe a truck column behind them. Mixed in are other sounds, the clatter of tracks, occasional shouted orders in Russian. They're close. He ducks back down into the turret, heart ticking faster. All right, Jespinster Panzer, he mutters, patting the turret wall. Time to haunt. He drops into the commander's seat, one foot braced on the floor, the other reaching for the improvised traverse handle. The long barrel of the 7.5 centimeters gun sits dead center at the moment, pointed straight down the road. He needs it to move. Slowly, deliberately, like someone up here is searching for targets. He leans on the makeshift crank. The turret resists, then grudgingly shifts. The whole world outside the vision block slides a few degrees to the left. The squeal of the traverse gear is louder than he'd like, an ugly metallic groan. He winces. Quiet, you beast. You're supposed to be menacing, not pathetic. The noises on the road grow clearer. He catches a glimpse through the periscope. Shadows at first, then shapes. AT-34/76 rolls into view, emerging from the mist like something summoned. Low hull, rounded turret, the white stripe of a guard unit hastily painted on the side. Behind it, another, and behind those, vague silhouettes of trucks and infantry. An entire spearhead, and he is one broken tank in a ditch. Otto swallows. You can almost feel that moment yourself, the cold drop in the stomach, the way your throat tightens when you realize just how small you are in the face of what's coming. The lead T-34 slows as it nears a gentle rise in the road. Its turret turns a fraction, the commander's head poking out of the hatch, goggles pushed up on his forehead. He's scanning the terrain. From his angle, all he'll see, if Otto does this right, is the blunt snout of a Panzer IV hull down behind a slight ridge, turret already oriented roughly in his direction. An ambush position. Otto's fingers hover over the engine switches. The Maybach is still off. Silence is safety, but silence also looks dead. He thinks about it for exactly one heartbeat. Then he throws the improvised ignition. The starter grinds. The jury-rig coil spits. The engine roars awake with the same ragged, uneven bellow as before, vibrating the whole tank. Exhaust pours from the rear in a thick, dirty plume, drifting like smoke over the ditch. From the T-34's perspective, a German tank that looked dead in the half-light just came to life. The Soviet column stops, not gradually, abruptly. Tracks squeal. Men shout. A hand shoots up from the T-34 turret, signaling halt. The second tank nearly bumps the first before braking in time. Trucks behind them swerve slightly, kicking up dust. For a second, the entire spearhead is frozen on that road, every gun suddenly very aware of the long, dark tube pointed their way from the rise. Otto feels his pulse hammering in his throat. Step 1, he whispers. Make them see you. Step 2 is trickier. He needs to look not just alive, but ready. Aggressive. Like a tank destroyer crew waiting for the perfect shot, not a lone mechanic praying no one notices the missing track tension or oil pooling under his belly. He leans on the traverse crank again. This time, he moves the turret in a slow, deliberate sweep across the Soviet column, as if searching for the best target. T-34. Second T-34. Trucks. Infantry. From the outside, it probably looks like a commander up here checking his range. Inside, Otto's teeth are clenched so hard his jaw aches. The gun settles back roughly on the lead T-34. Across the road, the Soviet tank's commander ducks down into the turret, then reappears with field glasses. He scans the rise, sees the muzzle, sees the frontal armor of a Panzer crouched where any sane German officer would put it. He can't see the cracked transmission. He can't see the burnout wiring. He can't see that there's one man inside doing the work of 5. Otto shifts his eye to the gun sight. Crosshairs. The familiar circle and lines overlaid on the world beyond. T-34 in the glass. Range, maybe 600 meters. He has AP rounds. He could try it. Take the shot. He might even punch through and kill the lead tank. And then what? Everything out there would open up. Katyusha rockets. He from multiple guns. Infantry pouring into the fields, flanking, swarming with grenades and Molotovs. He by fear. But not time. He pulls back from the sight, breathing hard. No, he tells himself. You're a scarecrow, not a reaper. He slams his fist lightly on the breech. He mutters. Big boom in the wrong place. He scrambles down to the ammo rack, muscles moving on a well-practiced routine. He knows where everything is by feel, the heavy, blunt shapes of armor piercing, the sleeker he shells. He hauls one he round up and slams it into the breech, muscles burning. He swings the gun a few degrees off the Soviet column. Not at them, near them. He takes a breath, settles his eye behind the sight, and squeezes the trigger. The tank bucks. Inside, it feels like someone just punched 431 in the chest. Dust explodes from every crevice. The gun's roar smashes around the interior and leaks out of the hatch in a flat, hard bang. Outside, the He shell whistles across the field and detonates in a copse of trees just beyond the road, showering the T-34 column with splinters, leaves, and a spectacular plume of earth. To anyone not watching carefully, it looks like a deliberate miss, warning shot from a crew confident enough to play. The reaction is immediate. Soviet infantry dives for cover. Men jump from trucks, scrambling to the roadside ditch. The lead T-34 reverses a meter, swinging its turret toward Otto's position. The second tank slews half off the road, trying to angle its armor. He's got their full attention now. In the chaos, he hears a different voice in his head, Weber's from hours earlier. If we stay, we get overrun. Not yet, Otto mutters. Not if I can make them think this road is cursed. He works the traverse handle again, sweating, muscles screaming. He moves the barrel a few degrees, then stops, lets the Soviets see it shift. Gun's not jammed. Turret's not blind. A second shell goes into the breech. Another He doesn't have many, but right now, volume is less important than illusion. He aims again, not at the tanks, but at a patch of open ground further down the road. He fires. Another concussion. Another plume of dirt, closer this time, bracketed like a gunner walking rounds onto a target. To the Soviet commander with field glasses, this looks like a German crew establishing zero, adjusting by feel, getting ready to plant one right in his glassy. He doesn't know that the man doing all this is alone, already exhausted, and that the engine powering this show is barely hanging on out of sheer spite. The Soviet column stops, moving forward entirely. For a moment, Otto thinks it might even start backing up. Instead, he sees something that makes his stomach knot. Movement in the tree line. Not tanks. Infantry. A Soviet recon platoon is slipping off the road, fanning out through the woods, working around the flanks. Of course they are. No sane commander pushes straight into an ambush when he can probe from the side. If those scouts get close enough, they'll see everything. The slack tracks, the oil, the fact that this threat is a single crippled Panzer pretending to be part of screen line that no longer exists. Otto feels sweat trickling down his ribs under the black Panzer jacket. He has maybe minutes before someone in a steel helmet and a padded jacket gets close enough to realize he's bluffing. He glances at the ammo again, at the MG-34 hanging in its coaxial mount, at the hatch above his head. How many ways are there to make one tank look like more than it is? He doesn't know yet, but he's about to find out, because the Red Army isn't just going to sit on that road forever. Sooner or later, someone is going to call his bluff. And when they do, this ghost tank will have to decide whether it's content to scare, or if it's willing to bite. The forest is waking up. Out beyond the road, where the mist hugs the ground and the birches grow thin and white, Soviet infantry are filtering through the trees. Dark shapes, Mosinagants slung over shoulders, helmets catching what little light there is. Otto can't see them clearly from the gun sight, just glimpses between trunks. But he doesn't need to see details to know what they're doing. They're feeling their way around the flanks, looking for a blind spot, looking for his blind spot. He wipes sweat from his upper lip with the back of his hand. Fine, he mutters. You look for ghosts. I'll make you hear them. He ducks away from the main sight and swings to the coaxial MG-34. The belt hangs heavy, a line of 7.92 mm rounds draped into the feed. It's more ammo than he can realistically afford to waste. But this is about psychology, not marksmanship. He yanks the trigger in short, savage bursts. The chatter of the MG rips through the morning. From outside, it must sound like a full crew has opened up, gunner firing at infantry, loader feeding the belt, commander calling corrections. Inside, every burst punches his eardrums, brass casings tinkling down into the catcher tray. He walks the fire across the tree line, not directly at the advancing scouts, but close enough to make them hit the dirt. Bark explodes from birch trunks. Leaves shred. Birds explode into panic flight. A Soviet voice yells something, too far to make out words, but the tone is obvious. Down! The recon platoon stalls, pinned by a weapon they can't see clearly. The lead T-34 on the road stays put. Otto lets the MG go silent. He knows better than to keep up a steady stream. That suggests panic. A rattling, desperate German gunner hoping volume alone will solve the problem. He wants control. He wants the man on the other end of the binoculars to think whoever is up there knows what he's doing. He's not wasting ammunition. He's picking his shots. So he waits. 10 seconds. 20. Then he swings the gun a few degrees and taps out another short burst into a slightly different section of trees. Good morning, he says under his breath. We're still watching you. A kilometer to the west, in a shallow depression where 3 battered German vehicles are tucked under camouflage nets, Lieutenant Weber stands on the hull of a Panther, field glasses pressed to his eyes. He can see the road he just abandoned. He can see the low rise where 431 is dug in. He can see the Soviet column, frozen, hesitant, bunched up in exactly the way doctrine says it shouldn't be. What the hell? He murmurs. Beside him, a Feldwebel climbs up, breathing hard. Sir, Weber doesn't lower the glasses. Listen, he says. They hear it then, faint but distinct over the rumble of distant guns. The flat bark of a German 7.5 centimeters. The staccato of an MG-34. The Feldwebel's eyes widen. Is that 431? Weber says. It has to be. But you said the engine was dead. The NCO protests. You said. I said the transmission was gone. Weber snaps. I said it couldn't drive. I never said Otto wouldn't try something insane. He adjusts the focus, watching as another he round detonates near the road, sending a geyser of earth into the air. The lead T-34 reverses half a tank length. Trucks behind it begin to turn awkwardly, some attempting to pull off into fields, others nose-to-nose on the narrow road as officers shout and wave arms. They're not advancing. That's what matters. Weber feels a strange mixture of dread and pride twist in his chest. That idiot, he whispers. That heroic idiot. Behind him, the Panther's driver pokes his head out of the hatch. Orders, Herr Lieutenant, he calls. Weber hesitates, then shakes himself. Move, he says. We link up with the battalion at the river crossing. Spread the word. Route is clear now, but only because Feldman is buying time. We don't waste it. The driver nods and drops back inside. Engines grumble to life. As the little group of survivors starts to roll out, Weber allows himself one last look through the glasses. He can't see Otto. He can only see the tank, and the fear it's generating. Hold them as long as you can, he murmurs. Then find a way out, you stubborn rat. The The Panther clanks off, leaving behind the Ghost on the rise. Back in 431, Otto is starting to feel every second. His arms ache from cranking the Traverse manually. His shoulder throbs from the recoil of the main gun. His throat is raw from breathing dust and exhaust. But his mind is clear, laser-focused. The Soviet column is now in a cautious, defensive posture. The lead T-34 has angled its glacis toward him. The second is covering the flank. Trucks are scattered in shallow ditches, infantry using them as ad hoc cover. They're talking on their radios, deciding, advance? Artillery? Flank wider? Otto knows they won't sit forever. He also knows he can't match them if they come. So he keeps playing the only card he has. He fires another round, this time further down the road, then waits longer, stretching the time between shots, making it look like a commander pacing his fire, conserving ammunition, calculating. Then he does something that would have made any Panzer instructor scream. He kills the engine. Silence slams down inside the hull. Outside, the exhaust plume thins rapidly. To a Soviet observer, it might look like a crew shutting down to listen, to avoid overheating, to avoid giving away thermal signature. Or it might look like a momentary glitch. Either way, it resets the rhythm. Otto sits in the commander's seat, breathing hard, listening with everything he has. He hears the distant rumble of more engines further east. Reinforcements, or just more of the endless Soviet tide. He hears birds cautiously resuming their calls in the woods. And he hears something else. Voices. Closer this time. Russian. 2, maybe 3 men. He peeks through the periscope. There, at the edge of the tree line, a small group of Soviet scouts has crept closer. They're hugging the side of a shallow ditch, moving in bounds, trying to get an angle where the Panzer's gun can't depress enough to hit them. Smart. They're close enough now that he can see the dirt on their padded jackets, the shine on their helmets. One carries a PTRD anti-tank rifle slung over his shoulder. If they get another 30 meters, they'll see too much. They'll see the lack of track marks ahead of 431. They'll see the sheen of leaked oil. They'll start to suspect that this threat is more bark than bite. Otto's fingers rest on the MG-34 trigger. He doesn't want to shoot them. Not because they're Soviet. Not because of any moral revelation. Because every bullet he fires is another data point for some smart officer to analyze. Another clue about his position, his discipline, maybe even his crew size. But if he doesn't fire, he exhales a long, control breath. Sorry, he murmurs, mangling the Russian word. You chose the wrong haunted house. He squeezes the trigger. The MG spits a short, violent burst. From his angle, he can't aim precisely, just rake the ditch line. One of the scouts goes flat, another tumbles sideways. The man with the PDRD rolls into the embankment, weapons slipping from his grasp. Screams. Shouted orders. The surviving scouts crawl back, dragging their wounded, leaving the anti-tank rifle lying awkwardly in the grass. The recon probe has been blunted. For now, Otto's stomach twists. He's not thinking about the man he hit. He's thinking about the clock. Every minute he holds them here is another minute Weber has to reach the river, to find a bridge that's still standing, to get his remaining tanks and whatever infantry they've gathered across before the Soviets close the pocket. But every minute he holds them here is also a minute closer to the moment someone decides to solve the problem with heavy artillery. He feels it coming the way you feel a storm before the first drop hits. The Soviets won't accept a single stubborn tank blocking a road for long. Soon, a battery commander will get coordinates. Soon, a fire mission will be plotted. Target, German tank on ridge. Suppress and neutralize. He hears another sound now. A whistle? No. Radio. On their side. His side has gone quiet. He grips the traverse handle again and moves the turret slowly, like a shark's fin cutting across the surface of the field. You're not looking at a wreck, he wants to tell them. You're looking at a decision. How many men do you want to lose finding out how dead I really am? He doesn't know how much longer the bluff will hold. But as he reaches for another shell, sweat stinging his eyes, another thought surfaces. A memory of Weber's words. If you're not out of this steel coffin by dawn, I won't be able to come back. Dawn is here. Weber is gone. And Otto Feldman has to decide, very soon, whether he intends to die in this tank, or if there's still a way to walk away from this road without letting go of the time he's bought. The lull doesn't last. It never does. For a few long seconds after that last MG burst, the battlefield seems to hold its breath. No one moves on the road. No scouts poke their heads up in the tree line. Even the birds keep their complaints to themselves. Then the Red Army remembers who it is. Somewhere behind the T-34s, a radio crackles. A man with headphones and a field telephone barks into it. Another officer, closer to the tanks, gestures sharply toward the rear, stabbing a finger toward Otto's position on the rise. Otto doesn't need to speak Russian to read that body language. They decided. No more probing. No more guessing. They're going to blast the problem flat. He doesn't hear the first salvo being ordered, but he feels the change. It starts as a low tremor in the air, a bass note under the distant roar. Then comes the whistle, thin at first, then swelling into a descending shriek that slices through nerves like a wire. Incoming. The first Soviet shell hits 30 meters short and to the right. Earth erupts into the air, a fountain of dirt hammering the Panzer's side armor in a wave of pebbles and clods. The tank rocks in the ditch, the hull ringing like a struck bell. Otto ducks instinctively, even though there's nowhere to duck to in here. All right, he gasps. That's new. Another whistle. Another impact. This one behind him, somewhere near the copse of trees that used to be their supporting infantry's cover. They're bracketing him, using the road as a reference, using the silhouette of his turret as a range marker, adjusting fire with each landing. They still think he's worth the shells. That's good. That's bad. He glances at the guttural Maybach throbbing behind him, at the jury-rig coil throwing sparks it was never meant to, at the improvised traverse handle still jammed into the gearbox. How long can this farce last? How long do they need? He murmurs. Weber, the Panther, the Stoogie, the other four, whatever's left of Panzer Regiment 31. They're somewhere behind him now, grinding toward a river that may or may not still have a bridge. Every minute the Soviets sit here, shelling a single tank, instead of chasing, is a minute closer to survival for those men. He looks at his watch. He doesn't remember when he took it off. Now it sits velcroed to the instrument panel with a strip of tape, tiny hands jittering with each near miss. He does the math backwards. How far to the river? How fast a retreating column can realistically move on cratered roads? How long it takes Soviet artillery to run through a standard fire mission before someone higher up the chain says, enough, push on. If he stays in 431, there's only one way this ends, in a fireball, with him welded to the inside of the hull. But if he bails too early, if they see the tank is empty, if the firing stops and the column starts moving again, then all of this was just noise, not time. A third shell hits closer. This time, the blast slams into the frontal armor and sends a sharp, metallic shriek through the hull. Dust and rust cascade from the ceiling. A hairline crack snakes along a weld seam by the driver's visor. The Panzer groans like something alive. Otto winces, hand instinctively reaching down to steady himself on the turret ring. Easy, Madchen, he whispers. You've taken worse. He doesn't know if that's true. It doesn't matter. He needs a way to make her keep playing after he's gone. The idea comes like most good ones do in war, halfway between panic and absolute focus. He looks at the throttle linkage. Right now, the engine sits at rough idle, occasionally coughing like an old man in the cold. A little more power gives the Maybach a fuller voice, makes the vibration more pronounced, the exhaust thicker, more alive. He could wedge the throttle, a length of wood, a toolbox, anything to hold it just above idle. That would buy him a little time, until the engine overheats, seizes, or shakes itself apart. Then the turret. The manual traverse is a simple mechanical advantage system. Handle, gears, motion. As long as something is turning that handle, the turret will creep. He stares at the jack handle jammed into the socket. Then he looks at the tool rack, at the coil of rope hanging there, and at the hatch and the slope down the rear of the hull. Maybe, he murmurs, maybe you can haunt them properly. 10 minutes later, Otto steps back, wiping sweat and grime from his forehead with a shaking hand. Inside the Panzer, the jury-rigged ghost machine is ready. He's wedged the throttle with a steel toolbox and a block of wood, binding them in place with wire so the engine stays at a low, steady roar. Not enough to redline it, just enough to make it sound purposeful, confident. Then he's tied one end of the rope to the traverse handle and run the line up through the hatch, over the cupola rim, and back down the rear of the turret. At the back of the hull, he's attached the other end to a heavy, jagged chunk of track thrown during the night's fighting, easily 30 kilos of steel. He's balanced that chunk on the very rear edge of the engine deck, braced with smaller pieces of scrap. From here, in the fighting compartment, the rope runs taut from handle to hatch, waiting. He gives it a test tug. The handle turns. The turret squeaks a few degrees. Outside, through the periscope, he sees the barrel move slightly, sliding along the horizon. The Soviets will see that. They'll see the turret drifting, adjusting, scanning. All he has to do is drop the counterweight. Let gravity do the work. Let that 30 kilos of steel drag the rope down, slowly turning the traverse as it goes. The turret will move on its own, like a head looking left and right, as if the tank itself is restless, watching. A proper ghost. Another shell hits behind him, closer this time. The tank bucks, the block of track on the engine deck wobbling on its precarious perch. Not yet, Otto hisses. You wait for me. He kills the engine one last time, just long enough to savor the silence, to hear nothing but his own breath and the faint ticking of hot metal. Then he does two things. First, he crawls to the driver's compartment, fishes a small cloth-wrapped bundle from behind a panel, and stuffs it into his jacket. A tool roll, knife, spare parts, little things that mean survival if you end up on foot in a hostile forest. Second, he takes out his pistol, a standard-issue P-38, checks the magazine by reflex, and tucks it back into his holster. He looks around the interior of 431 one final time. Every surface is familiar. Every scratch carries a story. The spot where Kappel smacked his head on the hatch ring that one night. The chipped paint where Weber slammed his fist after a lucky escape. You did well, Otto says softly to the steel. You deserved a quieter grave. Another whistle. Another impact. Plaster from some imaginary ceiling rains down on the tank. It's time. He runs back the way he's moved all night. Fighting compartment. Traverse handle. Rope. He starts the Maybach. The tank shakes awake. Engine noise filling the world. Then, without allowing himself even a heartbeat to reconsider, he grabs the hatch rim, hauls himself up into the cupola, and stands half-exposed in the dawn air. From this vantage, he can see everything. The Soviet column still stalled. The lead T-34 turret locked on his ridge with near-murderous patience. The infantry in the ditch, some watching him through field glasses, others clutching their weapons like talismans. He wonders, for one absurd second, if any of them can see his face. If some Soviet sergeant will remember, years from now, the glimpse he caught of a German tanker up there, outlined against a burning sky. He doesn't wave. He doesn't salute. He just stoops, grabs the track piece with both hands, and kicks away the small stones bracing it. It tips. For an instant, it hangs there, defying gravity with sheer stubbornness. Then it slides. The weight drops off the rear of the hull, rope hissing across metal as it's dragged after it. Inside, the traverse handle starts to turn, slowly, inexorably, under the pull. From the outside, the Panzer's turret begins a lazy, continuous sweep to the left, the gun tracking like a watchful eye across the fields. All by itself, Otto doesn't stay to admire his handiwork. He drops back into the turret just long enough to yank a smoke grenade from a rack, pull the pin, and roll it out into the ditch beside the hull. White smoke billows up almost instantly, mingling with the tank's exhaust, making the whole ridge look like it's wrapped in creeping fog. Then he goes. He slips through the loader's hatch, the one closer to the ground on the far side of the turret, away from the road, and drops into the ditch, teeth jarring from the impact. He hugs the slope, keeping the hull between him and the Soviet line. Above him, the Maybach roars steadily. The turret groans as the rope-driven handle turns. The barrel keeps sweeping back and forth, left to right, right to left. A haunted machine. Otto keeps low, half-crawling, half-stumbling along the ditch line, using every fold in the ground as cover. When he judges he's far enough to be out of the direct arc of any observing binoculars, he cuts right, slipping into the tree line like just another shadow. Behind him, the ghost tank keeps staring at the road it no longer guards. He's 300 meters into the forest before it happens. He doesn't see it. He hears it. The shriek of a full battery salvo. The crash of impacts. A roar so huge, it seems to tear the air itself apart. He drops instinctively, pressing his face into the damp earth as the shock wave ripples through the forest. Leaves tremble. Birds explode from branches like living shrapnel. The Soviets have finally decided. He twists on the ground and looks back through the trees. Over the tops of the birches, a blossom of fire and smoke climbs into the air, right where 431 sits. Saturday. The shells walk back and forth across the rise, methodically, ruthlessly. The ridge disappears behind a curtain of dust and smoke. Somewhere inside that maelstrom, steel is ripping, welding itself into grotesque, new shapes under unimaginable heat. For a moment, Otto can't breathe. He knew this would happen. He planned for it. That doesn't make it easier to hear his tank die. He lies there, chest heaving, eyes stinging. Not from smoke, though there's that too. Sorry, Madchen, he whispers. You deserved better. When the barrage finally stops, the world feels muted, like everything is happening under a thick blanket. The Soviet column is still there. He can just make out the dark blocks of T-34s through the thinning haze. They don't move immediately. They wait. No more shots from the ridge. No more MG bursts. No more engine. Eventually, suspiciously, one T-34 inches forward, then another, guns trained on the smoldering patch where the Panzer once stood guard. It will take time for them to decide it's safe. Time to probe. Time to realize that the ghost is truly gone. Time that Weber and the others are using right now to get further down the road, closer to the river, closer to a chance that this retreat isn't a complete disaster. Otto wipes his face with a grimy sleeve, forcing himself to his knees. He is alone, somewhere between the wrecked front and a collapsing rear, a single man with a pistol, a tool roll, and no tank. But not useless. Not yet. He gets up. He turns his back on the ridge, and he starts walking west. Behind him, 431 burns quietly in the mist, just another knocked-out tank on another bloody road. The Soviets will mark it on their maps as a destroyed German vehicle. Someone might even claim it as a kill. They'll never know that, for a few critical minutes, it was a ghost holding them in place. By the time Otto's legs remember how to move without steel beneath them, his ears are still ringing. Every step feels wrong. For days he's been measured in track links and gear changes, the world seen through periscope glass and gun sights. Now it's just forest floor, wet leaves, roots, and the occasional shell crater turned into a murky pool. He keeps the burning ridge on his right, using the column of smoke as a grisly landmark. The barrage has stopped. The Soviet guns have found new targets. Somewhere behind him, men are climbing over the blackened carcass of 431, checking for survivors, prying open hatches with crowbars. He doesn't look back. His breathing evens out as he moves deeper into the trees. The scent of burning oil fades, replaced by damp moss and the sharp, clean smell of birch bark when his sleeve brushes a trunk. For the first time since before midnight, he is not inside a machine. He's just a man again. He doesn't like it. Inside the tank, there were controls. Levers. Switches. As long as there was something to fix, there was something he could do. Out here, the war is just weather. It happens to you. A distant burst of automatic fire cracks through the trees, somewhere to the north. Not aimed at him. Not yet. Otto keeps west. He nearly walks into them. He's sliding down the far side of shallow ravine when a voice snaps. Halt. Kenwert. He freezes, one boot still on the slope, the other ankle-deep in mud. 3 rifles point at him from behind a fallen tree. Field gray uniforms. Steel helmets with netting. Wehrmacht, not Red Army. A skinny Lancer with a ragged mantle squints over the sights of his car, 98K. Well, he demands. Password. Otto's mind goes blank for half a second. They changed the code words yesterday, or the day before. Thomas started blending. He gropes for it. Berg, he tries. No. Flube. The river. The rifleman's cheek tightens against the stock. That's not it. They changed it again. Another soldier mutters. Show your hands. A third snaps. Otto slowly raises his hands, palms outward, fingers still stained with oil. I've just crawled out of Panzer that the Russians turned into scrap metal, he says, voice dry. If I were Ivan, I would smell better. There's a beat of silence. Then someone at the back of the little knot of men says, Feldman. Otto blinks. Ja. A figure straightens up from the tree line, mud-splattered, eyes red from smoke, black Panzer wrap hanging open at the throat. Lieutenant Weber. He pushes past the riflemen, ignoring their protests, and stares at Otto as if he's a ghost himself. You, Weber says. You were supposed to be dead. Otto shrugs, arms still raised. Tank is. I'm not. Weber's jaw works, like he's chewing an argument. Then he barks. Lower your weapons, you idiots. That's my mechanic. The rifles drop an inch. Not all the way. Wars taught them to be cautious even with good news. Otto lets his hands fall, flexing the stiffness out of his fingers. You made it to the river? He asks. Weber nods once. Barely. The bridge held. For now. He jerks his head at the men behind him. Maybe a dozen all told, a mix of infantry and a pair of tankers recognizable by their black uniforms and grease on their collars. We're rear guard for what's left of the division, he says, trying to keep some kind of order in this mess. And then he gestures vaguely back toward the smoke plume over the trees. We start hearing about a Panzer on a ridge that's holding up an entire Soviet column. He looks Otto up and down, taking in the lack of burns, the intact limbs. We thought you went down with it, Weber finishes. Almost, Otto says. But I decided to disappoint you. Weber snorts. You've been disappointing me for years. The insult has no teeth. He claps a gloved hand on Otto's shoulder, grip hard enough to hurt. What did you do, he demands. The Ivan sat on that road for nearly half an hour. Scouts said they saw your turret moving after the rest of us were gone. They saw shots. MG fire. Then artillery pounded the position flat. We assumed it buried you. Otto pulls a breath deep into his lungs, feeling each rib protest. He's suddenly aware of how tired he is. I made noise, he says. Hit nothing. Scared them. Wired the turret to move on its own. Let them shell a ghost while you ran. One of the riflemen whistles softly. A moving dummy, he says. You turned a wreck into a scarecrow. A scarecrow that shoots, another adds. Weber just stares at him. You wired the turret, he repeats slowly, to move by itself. Otto shrugs, as if the details are trivial. Gravity helped. Weber barks out a helpless laugh. It sounds a little hysterical at the edges. I'll leave you alone for 30 minutes, he says, and you build a haunted tank. He shakes his head, the laughter dying. Do you have any idea what that bought us? He asks quietly. The bridge was already under sporadic fire when we got there. If that Soviet spearhead had arrived 10 minutes earlier, he doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't have to. They'd have been crushed between hammer and anvil. Red Army armor behind them, artillery in front, river at their backs. Instead, they crossed. Not neatly, not in parade order, but enough of them got over that when the bridge finally took a direct hit and folded into the water, there were still boots on the western bank. Otto looks down at his hands, grease and dirt in the creases. I couldn't drive you out, he says simply. So I made them think I could. The skinny rifleman who challenged him earlier lowers his weapon the rest of the way. Verdammt, he mutters. We've got sorcerers in the Panzer truck now. They move as a group. There's no time for debriefs, no time to sit under a tree and sketch out the details of what just happened. This is a retreat in the middle of a collapse, not a staff ride. Weber gives Otto half a canteen and a chunk of dark bread from his pocket. It tastes like ash and heaven all at once. As they trudge west, the forest thins, giving way to churned-up fields and the flattened remains of once orderly trench lines. Smoke hangs over everything like low cloud. They pass a burned-out Panther, its long 7.5 centimeters barrel pointing accusingly at the sky, turret hatch warped shut from heat. Men avert their eyes without meaning to. You rarely look directly at your own possible future. Otto does look. For a moment, he superimposes 431 over the wreck in his mind. Imagines what his tank must look like now. Turret crushed, track blown free, black scars radiating from shell holes. The ghost finally laid to rest. Hey, Weber's voice pulls him back. You know, they're already talking about it, the lieutenant says. About what? Otto asks. The tank on the ridge, Weber says. Some Feldwebel from the Fusiliers came through the rally point, saying there were 3 Panzers holding the road. Then someone else swore it was a full company. Every time the story gets told, he spreads his hands. You grow. Otto snorts. I was one man in a broken 4. Yes, Weber says. You and a corpse. Together, you looked like more. They walk in silence for a few paces. Do you know why I let you have those 20 minutes? Weber asks suddenly. Otto thinks back. The open hatch. The argument. The ultimatum. Because you knew I wouldn't come with you unless I tried, he says. Weber smirks faintly. That too. But also, because you were always the one who saw machines differently. The rest of us saw tanks as things you either drive or abandon. You see options. He kicks at a chunk of broken track lying in their path. You took a rule, dead tank is gone. And broke it, he says. Turned the wreck into a weapon. Otto shrugs, uncomfortable with the praise. I just used what was left, he says. Isn't that what we all do? Weber glances at the thin line of men straggling along the road. Remnants of squads. Pairs where there used to be platoons. Ja, he says softly. I suppose it is. They reach the river by mid-afternoon. What's left of the bridge is a twisted skeleton of steel and stone jutting out over fast-moving water. Charred planks dangle from support beams blown inward like snapped ribs. On the western bank, German engineers have thrown together a makeshift ferry using pontoons and wooden platforms. Trucks, guns, and men are queued up in a ragged line, waiting their turn to cross. The air buzzes with urgency. Orders. Curses. Engine coughs. Weber finds a staff officer with a headset and a map board, trading clipped sentences, sketching the Soviet movements they left behind. When he mentions the delayed spearhead, the staff officer's eyebrows go up. "One Panzer," he says, holding an entire column. There's skepticism in his tone, but also hunger. An army in retreat needs stories almost as much as it needs ammunition. Not holding, Weber corrects. Stalling. There's a difference. "Name?" the officer asks, pencil poised. Weber glances over his shoulder at Otto, who's standing by the verge, staring at the water as if he's trying to calculate how many tanks worth of weight it can carry before it surrenders. "Unteroffizier Otto Feldman," Weber says. The officer scribbles it down, already turning to the next crisis. The ink is barely dry when someone else stops Weber, asking if he's heard about the ghost Panzer up near Babruysk. The rumor already mutated, moved, magnified. Weber just shakes his head and keeps walking. He finds Otto again near the makeshift ferry, where men are loading crates and wounded onto the wooden platform. "You're on the next crossing," Weber says. "After that, I want you near the workshops. If we're going to keep anything running in this chaos, I need your hands not blown off." Otto nods, eyes still on the current. "You think they'll tell it like it was?" he asks. "What, the tank?" Weber says. "The story," Otto answers. "Later. If there is a later." Weber considers. "No," he says finally. "They'll make it bigger, cleaner, easier to understand. That's what people do with war stories." Otto grunts. "I just don't want them to forget the tank was already dying before it started scaring them." Weber claps his shoulder again. "Look at it this way," he says. "It died as something the enemy feared, not as scrap left in a ditch. There are worse fates." A whistle blows. The ferry creaks, rope pulleys groaning as it's hauled back to their side. Otto steps onto the swaying platform, boots thudding on damp wood. He grips the railing as the river grabs the pontoons, trying to twist them downstream. The crossing is slow. Halfway across, he looks back. The eastern bank is a blur of smoke, wreckage, and a thin line of men still waiting their turn. Somewhere beyond that, invisible now, a burned-out hull sits on a ridge, turret frozen in mid-sweep. He imagines Soviet infantry finally reaching it, climbing up, kicking at the charred track piece on the ground, finding the rope, the hacked-up radio guts. He wonders what they'll think. He was crazy, some Red Army tech will say. Crazy, but clever. Maybe they'll laugh. Maybe they'll respect it. Maybe they'll be too tired to care. He turns away from the bank, facing west. The war is not over. Not for him. Not for Weber. Not for the ghosts they're accumulating with every kilometer. But somewhere behind them, on a road near Babruysk, there's now a new kind of story in circulation. About a tank that should have died quietly and didn't. Soon, that story will start to change. To grow. To slip beyond the control of the men who were actually there. And years from now, in kitchens and bars and veterans' halls on both sides of the old front, the legend of a ghost Panzer that turned back the Red Army will live a life of its own. Otto Feldman doesn't know any of that yet. He only knows the feel of the ferry's boards under his boots, the weight of his tool roll in his pocket, and the knowledge that, for one brief, impossible morning, a broken tank and a stubborn mechanic managed to bend an unstoppable tide. October 1959. Somewhere outside Leipzig, East Germany. Rain patters softly on the tiled roof as the old men argue. The kitchen is warm, too warm, a coal stove rattling in the corner. A faded lace curtain hangs over the window, yellowed from years of cigarettes and winter soot. On the table sits a bottle of schnapps, 3 mismatched glasses, and a chessboard missing 1 black pawn. A radio murmurs patriotic slogans in the next room. But in here, the sound is just background noise. Otto Feldman sits with his back to the wall, hands folded loosely around an empty glass. He's grayer now, hair thinner at the temples, but the mechanic's hands are still there, scarred, strong, restless. Oil has been replaced by coal dust and factory grime, but the pattern is the same. Across from him sits Karl Weber, no longer a lieutenant in black Panzer wrap, but a clerk in a brown jacket, glasses perched low on his nose. His shoulders still carry a faint stiffness, as if they haven't accepted that the weight of a tanker's headset is gone. The third man at the table is the stranger. He wears a neat civilian coat, a worker's cap, and the cautious curiosity of someone who isn't entirely sure he's welcome. His German is heavily accented, with the round vowels and rolled R's of the East. He pours a careful splash into his glass. "Za was Zdorowy," he says out of habit, then smiles faintly. "Sorry. Old tongue. To your health." Weber raises an eyebrow. You said you were from where, comrade? The stranger smiles again. From the other side of the artillery, he says. Byelorussian front. I was with the 3rd Guards Tank Army. We came through your, what do you call it? Bag ration. He looks around the little kitchen, as if trying to reconcile the quiet with the memory of burning fields. I'm here now as guest, he adds. Exchange. He taps the side of his notebook, lying closed beside the chessboard. I collect stories. For our Veterans Committee. For our children. He glances at Otto. And I heard a story that brought me to you. Weber snorts softly. Let me guess. A ghost. The man nods, eyes bright. Yes. A ghost tank, he says. They say a Panzer that would not die. That sat on a hill near Babruysk and held up an entire Guards regiment while the rest of your division escaped. He leans forward, lowering his voice as if sharing a joke. They say the turret moved by itself even after the Germans were dead. Otto looks down at his hands. Weber takes off his glasses, rubs the bridge of his nose, and gives Otto a sideways look. You see what I meant, he says. Bigger, cleaner, easier to understand. The Soviet, his name is Nikolai, misreads the glance. Of course, there are embellishments, he says quickly. Men remember differently. Some say it was a Tiger, not a Panzer IV. Some swear there were 3. But always, the story of the turret that would not stop moving. He chuckles, a little embarrassed. When I was young lieutenant, he says, they told it around the campfire as warning. Don't underestimate German tankers, they said. They will fight even when their machines are dead. His eyes find Otto again. Now they tell it as lesson, he says. About fear, about perception, about how sometimes what you think you see on a battlefield decides more than what is really there. He taps the notebook, and one old sergeant, when I track him down, says, if you go to Germany, ask for a man named Feldman. The kitchen feels smaller suddenly. Otto shifts in his chair, bones creaking. You came all this way, he says quietly, to ask me if your ghost was just a man with dirty hands. Nikolai tilts his head. I came, he says, to ask what it was like inside the ghost. For a while, Otto doesn't answer. He looks at the chessboard, at the 2 knights facing each other over a field of worn squares. At the missing pawn, he thinks of the inside of 431, the smell of oil and sweat and fear, the way the hull trembled under artillery, the weight of the track piece in his hands as he pushed it off the rear deck. He spirals back to that morning so hard it makes his head swim. You almost feel it with him. The cramped steel, the roar of the Maybach, the grip of the traverse handle in his sweating palms, the way each shell felt heavier than the last. It was noisy, he says finally. Nikolai waits, pin hovering now. Noisy and very small, Otto continues. You're told as tank crewman that your machine is strong. Big gun, thick armor. But inside, he smiles without humor. Inside it is coffin with engine. 1 shell in right place, and it is over. Nikolai nods slowly. We know that feeling, he says. RT-34, also coffin when hit. Otto's eyes unfocus slightly, looking somewhere past the wall. I did not set out to make a ghost, he says. At first, I just refused to accept that she was finished. 20 minutes, the lieutenant gave me. 20 minutes to do what the maintenance manuals would call impossible. He talks then, not with the polished arc of the story as it existed in rumors, but in jagged, practical pieces. How he tore the Fug 5 radio apart. How he cursed at melted insulation. How the first 2 attempts to start the Maybach nearly failed. Nikolai listens intently, scribbling notes. When Otto gets to the rope and the counterweight, he stops writing for a moment, eyebrows climbing. You used gravity, he says, to move the turret. Otto says, why not? She cannot drive, but she could still turn. Weber snorts into his glass. You should have seen the engineers' faces when we told them. Half of them looked offended you didn't ask their permission. Nikolai laughs softly. In our version, he says, the ghost tank is angry. It moves because of the dead crew's will. It fires after they are gone. We argue if it is superstition or just bad memory. Now I see it as rope and junk. He doesn't sound disappointed. If anything, he sounds impressed. Bad memory is a kind of superstition, Otto says. Men see what fear shows them. You see a turret move, you don't think, there's clever rope. You think, there's somebody in there aiming at my head. Nikolai nods. Yes, he says quietly. My comrades saw you, or what they thought was you. They saw 1 tank and imagined 10 behind you. He takes a sip from his glass, then adds, we cursed you that day. You should have, Otto replies. I was trying to get you killed. The honesty lands between them like a shell that didn't explode. Then they both chuckle, thin and tired. War is simpler when it's past tense. Later, when Nikolai has gone to catch his train, notebook tucked under his arm like a fragile artifact, the kitchen feels too quiet. Weber stands at the sink, rinsing glasses. Otto stays at the table, staring at the empty bottle as if there's another story in the glass that he missed. You realize, Weber says over the rattle of dishes, that now your ghost has footnotes. Footnotes. Otto repeats. Weber nods. A Soviet officer. A notebook. A veterans committee. They'll write it down, argue about it. Half will say you're a myth, the other half will say you were a genius, and both will be wrong. Otto snorts. What would right look like? Weber dries his hands and leans against the counter, thinking. Right, he says slowly, would say, there was a mechanic who loved his tank enough to stay when everyone else left. He used tricks and scrap and stubbornness to make the enemy hesitate. It worked for a while. Then the tank died, and he walked away on his own 2 feet. He shrugs. Wright would say, it was small. It mattered. It did not win or lose the war. It just bought some time. And sometimes, that's all a man can do. Otto nods, eyes distant. Time, he echoes. We had so little. We stole minutes and pretended they were years. He thinks of all the big stories, cities encircled, armies destroyed, flags raised. The ones that get monuments, dates carved in stone. His story doesn't fit on a monument. It fits in that narrow space between a barrage lifting and an order to advance. In the minutes when one officer decided not yet because a turret wouldn't stop moving. Do you ever think about them? He asks suddenly. The ones on the road. The tankers. The infantry in the ditch. Weber sighs, taking off his glasses again. Every time it rains, he says, I remember mud and roads and wondering if someone over the next rise was waiting to kill me. Today, I'll remember that some of them were afraid of you. He smiles crookedly. Not bad legacy, for a man who never made it past Untitled. The years move on. The war hardens into books and plaques and ceremonies. Streets get named, then renamed. Flags change. In a small flat in Leipzig, an old mechanic dies one winter night with grease under his nails and a toolkit by the door. The obituary says little. Factory worker, husband, father. It doesn't mention 431 or the Ridge or the ghost tank. But somewhere in Minsk, an aging Soviet veteran tells his grandson about a German Panzer on a hill whose turret kept turning even as they shelled it to pieces. In a bar in West Germany, a former Panther driver argues with a paratrooper about whether the haunted tank at Babruysk was real or some story made up by a drunk Oberst. In a dusty archive in Potsdam, a handwritten Soviet report notes, enemy resistance encountered from single tank in hull-down position. Delayed advance by approximately 26 minutes. No names, just numbers. You, watching this, know more than the archivist did. You know that inside that single tank was a man rewiring a dead radio into an ignition coil, rigging a counterweight to a traverse handle, choosing not to fire at the enemy's heart, but at his nerves. You know that courage in war isn't always charging across open ground. Sometimes it's staying in a steel box everyone else has already written off, just long enough to make the other side wonder. In the end, the ghost tank of Operation Babruysk is exactly what all the best war stories are. Half fact, half fear, half the shape of a man trying not to be crushed by forces bigger than him. Yes, the math doesn't add up. Neither does war. But one thing does. For a brief, impossible morning in 1944, a broken Panzer IV and a mechanic named Otto Feldman stood between a Soviet spearhead and a collapsing German retreat. The Red Army saw a threat and hesitated. The ghosts did the rest. Yendi,